Hi there. So, we saw in last class how the Maccabees, led by Yehuda and his brothers, won miraculous victories over the Greek army, and they ended up forcing them to retreat. When the Maccabees sensed their victory, they decided it's time to return to Jerusalem and take the temple back. But when they arrived there, they found it in a terrible state. The gates were burned down, and weeds were growing everywhere. There were Greek idols strewn all over the place, and many of the vessels that were used in the temple had gone missing. So they quickly went about cleaning the place up and making it ready for operation again. In the temple, there were daily offerings brought on the altar. Now you can imagine that after the altar not having been used for such a long time, the first thing they would have wanted to do would be to bring the daily offering. The problem was that because the altar had been used for idol worship, it wasn't fit for temple service anymore. So the offerings couldn't be brought until the next day when a new altar was built. Interestingly, this is actually one of the reasons given for the celebration of Chanukah. We're celebrating the rededication of the altar. The Hebrew word Chanukah itself means dedication and refers to the fact that the Maccabees rededicated the altar then. Now, one of the things that had gone missing during that time was the menorah. Now, to replicate the old menorah would take an extremely long time and would cost an enormous amount of money, which is something the Maccabees didn't have, because the old menorah was made from solid gold, and all of its intricate designs were chiseled out from one massive golden slab, which to make would be quite an expensive undertaking. Instead, the Maccabees made a temporary, cheaper version out of metal spits, and they planned on using that instead. Now, when it came to lighting the menorah, the Maccabees were faced with another problem. According to Jewish law, only pure oil may be used to light the menorah, and all the pure oil that was stored in the temple had been defiled by the Greeks. So after searching and searching, they finally found one small jar of oil buried in the ground that still had the seal of the Kohen Gadol. But one jar would only been enough to have lasted for one day. So everyone knows what happened next. God made a miracle, and the oil burned for 8 days. What's not so well known is, why was the miracle necessary? Why couldn't they just have gone and made a new batch of oil and used fresh oil the next day? So a couple of explanations are given. Firstly, the oil in the temple had to be from the best quality olives, which only grew in a city called Tekoa. Now, it was about a 3 to 4 day journey from Jerusalem to Tekoa, so until they would have traveled there and then prepared a new batch of oil and then came back, it took them 8 days. Another explanation is that the Jews at that time were all impure because they'd been involved in fighting a war and had probably come in contact with dead bodies. The purification process takes 7 days. So they weren't able to make a fresh batch of oil until 8 days later. Another interesting thing to think about is, how exactly did the miracle happen? Like, what actually happened to the oil? Now, there's a bunch of different ways of looking at it, different opinions. Some people explain that the miracle was a quantitative miracle, which means that the oil miraculously increased. So either the oil in the jug would miraculously refill after it was emptied into the candle holders, or the oil in the candle holders themselves would miraculously refill each day after the candles had already burned out. Others explain that it was a qualitative miracle, which means that it was the same amount of oil, just it burned for longer than it normally would have. So again, either that means that they filled up the candle holders like they regularly would have, and they came in the morning and found that the oil had only gone down 1/8 of what it normally would have gone down. And then every following day, only 1/8 of the oil was consumed. Others explain that they actually expected a miracle to take place, and they originally divided the jug of oil into 8 parts. And each day, they only filled up the menorah with 1/8 of the regular amount of oil, and that 1/8 miraculously burnt the whole night. Those 8 days were days of intense celebration for the Maccabees, and the following year they instituted that the miracles be celebrated by the Jewish people as an annual holiday, which came to be known as the holiday of Chanukah. So we've had a look at the Chanukah story in brief, together with some of the events that led up to the story itself. In the next class, we're going to explore the holiday of Chanukah itself. What's the holiday all about, and some of the laws and customs that are related to the holiday of Chanukah.